Development Officer with Education Scotland's Inclusion, Wellbeing and Equalities team. Also on the call today is my colleague Sam Nicholson, who has been greeting you as you come in. And Sam will also be here in the background today monitoring the chats. We'll be here for an hour today with an aim to finish the presentation shortly before 5 p.m. to allow some time for Q&A as well. So we plan to begin now at 4 o'clock or just shortly after, but just before we do that, please note that we plan to record today's session, so your microphones and cameras are hopefully now switched off for the duration of the presentation. The chat function will be available and monitored by my colleagues throughout the session, and hopefully, though, any questions you have will be answered over the course of the presentation, but we will aim to allow some time for Q&A at the end. So please do feel free to add any questions you have to the chat. There are some accessibility functions available on Teams which you may like to make use of. When content's being shared, selecting focus on content allows you to pay closer attention and hide other people's video feeds. And full screen hides the title bar on top and the taskbar at the bottom for the best view. There is a high contrast mode, which can be useful for users with photosensitivity or contrast issues. Just use the slider under the presentation to turn it off if required. And you can use the following keyboard shortcuts and mouse commands as well for zooming in and out and resetting that. And also you can use live captions if preferred to improve your meeting experience as well. So we'll now launch into the topic for today, which is an introduction to fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD.
Hayley, before you start, could I ask a question? Will you be sharing the presentation following this session?
Yeah, I was going to say that, yeah. So the slides for the presentation will be shared with you after today's session. So you'll be able to access any links and resources that we refer to throughout the session. So our plan for today is to launch a new professional learning activity, which is now available on the Education Scotland website, and also to draw your attention to other reliable sources of information and guidance around approaches to support for individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD. We'll also raise some thoughts for consideration and discuss some practical ways to support learners with FASD in the classroom. We appreciate that we've got a wide audience here today with lots of different experiences and backgrounds and remits. So whether you're here today for your own professional learning or seeking out resources that may be helpful in your roles supporting other colleagues, we do hope that everyone here will find something that they can take away from today's session. So we've only got an hour for today's content, so we really did want to start by introducing the professional learning activity where you can explore the themes that we raised today in much more depth. We also encourage you to share this more widely with your colleagues. So whilst creation of this professional learning activity was a collaborative endeavour, I'd like to extend a huge thanks to colleagues from the Fetal Alcohol Advisory Support and Training Team, or FAST, and also the FASD Hub at Adoption UK for their work and support on this. On the call today are colleagues Jen Shields, who you can see on the screen, and also Rachel Byrne from FAST, and also Barbara Ogston from the FASD Hub. I wanted to acknowledge Rachel especially, whose immense knowledge and experience in FASD lies behind the majority of this piece of work. And also, we're really happy to have Jen here today, who has kindly agreed to be present for any questions which come up at the end of the presentation as well. So just a little bit about professional learning activities. These are part of the Education Scotland's online professional learning offer. They can be undertaken on your own or with colleagues together. They're intended to be flexible and enhance your professional learning by including up-to-date research and thinking using articles and video material, incorporating self-reflection activities to help you consider how you'll use your learning, and suggesting next steps in your learning journey. And once you've set up your free account on the website, all your progress is saved in the learning dashboard. When a PLA has been completed, you can download and keep a record of your learning, which is a handy tool for professional review and development. Probably important to note at this stage too that you can register for an account using Glow, but also it is possible to register using a non-Glow email address. So don't worry if you're not on Glow. The professional learning activity for FASD is divided into 6 sections, including a general overview or introduction, a section which considers care experience and trauma-informed practice through the lens of FASD, the problem of stigma, information and information about identification and diagnosis, and also a section which supports understanding of barriers to engagement and participation for learners with FASD, and also practical ways to support in a classroom and school context. The professional learning activity ends with a section as well, which signposts you to further sources of information, guidance, and support. And each of these sections ends with a set of questions to support reflection around your own understanding and practice. Beyond today's session, you may be interested in pursuing further professional learning opportunities or guidance. And firstly, we'd like to introduce you to the Fetal Alcohol Advisory Support and Training Team, who are funded by the Scottish Government with a national remit to provide and facilitate training, consultation and research in relation to FASD. For access to professional learning resources and further information regarding training and other learning opportunities, you can visit their website, and there's a link to that on the slide there that you'll have access to after the session today. And another source of practical information, guidance and support in relation to individuals with lived experience of FASD, especially parents and carers, is the FASD Hub Scotland. I personally have been on my own learning journey in relation to FASD in the last year or so, and I've found the FASD Hub's webinars, which are freely available online, highly informative. So I'd really recommend their resources and support as well. So thinking now about FASD and moving into the content of our session for today, with any individual, it's really important to start by understanding and valuing that individual's strengths. So whilst each individual is their own person, on the screen is a list of words that have been commonly used to describe individuals with FASD. It's important that we, as adults, maintain a flexible mindset. Sometimes a trait that we can perceive to be challenging, when channeled appropriately, can be seen as a strength. And this positive approach can really help encourage self-esteem in the children and young people that we're working with and supporting. And it's also really important to be aware with FASD that strengths can sometimes conceal underlying challenges. So, for example, a highly verbal able child or young person, that can really mask differently developing social and communication skills and their maturity, for example. So it's just really important to keep that in mind with any individual that we're thinking about. So just to give you a little break in listening to my voice, I'm going to play a short clip from a film by the FASD Hub, which should help serve as a short introduction into a child's experience of FASD. We won't share all of that film today, but we do invite you to explore the full film in your own time. And when you receive a copy of the slides after today's presentation, you'll be able to see that. So Sam, just let me know if there's any issue with the audio. I've hopefully selected the settings so that everyone can hear and see. Okay, so we'll just pause there and move on. I apologise to anyone who wasn't able to view it. I noticed a few comments coming up in the chats, and hopefully, sometimes I think when there's a lot of people on the call, but you will be able to access it using the slides in your own time as well. So, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD, is a term that's used to identify the range of physical, emotional, and developmental differences that may affect a person if they were exposed to alcohol whilst in their mother's womb. Exposure to alcohol affects how the central nervous system works and also how a baby's brain and body develops. And it's a lifelong condition. So brain differences seen in FASD can vary hugely from one individual to another, but it can manifest as significant differences in structure, size, growth, and function of the brain, and also the central nervous system. And this can result in difficulties with language, motor, social, and emotional development, as well as affecting academic attainment as well. FASD is understood to be, for many, a hidden disability. So, up to 1 in 10 people may have certain recognizable facial features, as well as microcephaly and also short stature. So, what this means, however, is that up to 90% of people with FASD will not have these facial features, with the most common effects of their FASD being seen in their brain and overall neurodevelopment, which means that these individuals can be missed when it comes to diagnosis and also developing an understanding of their needs. So it's really important to be aware of that there might be a lot of children and young people that we're working with and supporting and just maybe not aware of what's maybe underlying the challenges that we're noticing. So FASD is one of the most common neurodevelopmental conditions in the Western world. Even though the research into FASD is still rapidly evolving, it's been estimated that it can be up to 5 times more prevalent than autism, which was a real surprise to me, and has relatively the same prevalence rate of typical ADHD traits in child populations as well. Um, it's also currently estimated that between 3 and 5% of the UK population may be affected by FASD, and that 1 in 4 children in foster care may have FASD, and as high as 1 in 3 are within the criminal justice system. Given the large majority of children and adolescents do not show the characteristic facial features of FASD, it can be really difficult to formally diagnose a child, especially when they have complex behaviours or complex histories. And this can further be made difficult if there's no clear documentation of prenatal alcohol exposure. So misdiagnosis is particularly common in children with FASD without those commonly recognised facial features. And again, with over 90% of these children meeting the criteria for other neurodevelopmental conditions as well. So thank you to the FASD team for allowing us to share this image today, which shows the 10 functions of the brain which may potentially be affected by exposure to alcohol during pregnancy. And not every individual will experience challenges in all of these areas, but it's good to have an awareness of what they are and also ways to support. It can affect things like cognition, such as our thinking abilities. It can affect our day-to-day life skills, academic performance, emotional self-regulation, language and memory abilities, and things like impulse control as well. And we can see that through sort of risk-taking behaviours too. But whilst there are several features which are common to the experience of individuals with FASD, it really is important to acknowledge that the effects will vary for each child that we're working with. So no 2 children with FASD will learn and function in exactly the same way. This image on the screen, again from the FASD team, highlights how the pace of development can vary across developmental areas for individuals with FASD, creating what's often referred to as a spiky profile. In this example, we have an 18-year-old individual who may have an ability in expressive language, for example, which contrasts quite starkly with their comprehension and social skills. Often skills, particularly verbal ability, can be misleading and not match the child or young person's stage of development. Additionally, a child or young person's abilities in any area may vary, particularly at times when they're feeling tired or dysregulated. So when planning for support, it can be really helpful to consider the stage or a child or young person is at developmentally rather than their age, but also just bearing in mind that it can vary throughout the day or throughout the week as well, depending on what else is going on in their lives as well. Many of you here today will be familiar with trauma-informed practice, something we're talking about more and more in education at the moment, a model that's grounded in and directed by a complete understanding of how trauma exposure affects an individual's neurological, biological, psychological, and social development. It's important to recognise that there are multiple experiences and perspectives to trauma in the field of FASD, thinking about birth mothers or birth parents, especially mothers. There may be a lack of understanding of the causes and contributors of prenatal alcohol exposure. And also, a diagnosis has the potential to cause shame and guilt and stigma as well. Thinking about adoptive parents, there may be the loss of their expected family life and feelings of grief adjusting to their child's disability that was unexpected for them. And then also having to fight for services such as, for example, an FASD assessment, which might not be available or accessible. And then, of course, thinking about children themselves who have FASD, who might be developing differently, but also facing the same expectations as their peers if it's not recognised that this is what's going on for them. Also, it's really important to be aware that children with FASD are also at an increased risk of experiencing abuse and neglect. And also, really sadly, there's the awareness of blame culture towards their birth mother as well, which they might be experiencing. And then lastly, as well, for professionals, so knowledge of individual case histories, which may include disturbing or distressing situations or events. I'm thinking too about the limited time and means for meaningful self-care and ready access to supervision structures. It's an important thing to keep in mind as well for professionals who are supporting individuals who are experiencing their own challenges as well. I'm just going to show you a brief clip now from a film of an adoptive mum who kindly shared her family's experience of FASD. So we'll spend just about 2 minutes now, or 3 minutes, sharing a bit of this film, just to hear it from the perspective of an adoptive mum. So Sam, once again, just let me know if there's any issue with sound, but hopefully everybody, if not the majority of people, can access it. So we'll just pause there, but the film will be available to you on the slides as well, so that you can access it in full as well in your own time if you'd like to explore it some more. So just thinking a little bit more now about care experience and trauma-informed practice through the lens of FASD, we thought we'd share with you just some information from a study that was carried out by Gregory et al. In Peterborough in 2015. And audits in this study reported on looked after children and children who were put forward for adoption during a 12-month period in 2013. And it reported a history of prenatal exposure in 55 out of 160 health assessments for looked after children, which equated to 34%. So although that was a smaller scale study in one area, it's probably, interesting to think about how that might be translated across to a broader population, and just how many individuals we might be needing to think about within our education settings as well, and particularly of the children that we're working with who are care experienced. Research has also shown that women who have experienced trauma in the past, such as through adverse childhood experiences, or who are currently experiencing trauma, for example, through intimate partner violence, might be at higher risk of prenatal alcohol-exposed pregnancy as well. A large proportion of women who experience abuse or violence in their lifetime may use alcohol or drugs as a coping mechanism. Abuse and violence from partners may become worse during pregnancy. And in addition, mothers may feel pressurized by partners to consume alcohol during their pregnancy, and consumption can placate a partner and avoid threat of violence. In a study of 80 birth mothers of children with FASD, high rates of violence were experienced by mothers of children with FASD. And according to that study, 95% of birth mothers had experienced abuse as a child or adult. 77% had symptoms of PTSD, and 72% felt unable to reduce their alcohol use as they were in an abusive relationship. So it just kind of helps put this in perspective for us a little bit as well, understanding, what might be going on for people behind the scenes that we might not always be aware of. But we've just left a link there on the slide as well to our information on the Education Scotland website around nurture and trauma-informed approaches, which you might like to explore in more depth leading on from this as well. So it's really important with all this in mind to be aware of the effects of stigma in relation to FASD. Stigma refers to the prejudicial attitudes and stereotypes and the discriminatory beliefs towards the person or a group. And thinking about individuals with FASD, the stereotypes might include things like disability expectations. So the idea that people with FASD can or can't do certain tasks, or they have specific intellectual or behavioural limitations. And this can be linked to the expectation that FASD is always visible, and that people with FASD who don't look like they do should be capable of acting or performing in expected ways, or that FASD is only real if it's visible. And also the expected life trajectories for individuals with FASD, and the notion that individuals with FASD will experience certain adverse outcomes, such as low income or adoption, criminality, or substance using. And then stigma too can be experienced by women who have consumed alcohol in pregnancy. So there are narratives about alcohol consumption in pregnancy, which often don't consider the many influences on women's use of substances, and usually perpetuate misconceptions, especially regarding alcohol in pregnancy. And stereotypes can include demographic expectations. Assumptions about women most likely to drink during pregnancy are often based on socioeconomic factors, for example, their income level, ethnicity, age, education, and substance use. And also behavioural expectations that women will realise their pregnancy early and abstain. And also character expectations, so assumptions about culpability and character. And then there's stigma towards non-biological caregivers, narratives that also don't consider the impact of stigma in fostered or adoptive parents. Engagement with those who are experts through this lived experience often feel compelled to disclose their child's adopted to avoid assumptions being made. And some of those stereotypes can include the notion of overparenting, being overly protective, not allowing independence expected for the age the child's at, or the idea of bad parents, assumptions about their responsibility for the child's behaviour, as was highlighted in that short film of the parent just speaking. And also the idea of saintly parents or adoptive parents, examples that suggest caregivers are an exception in contrast to others who would not have adopted children with disabilities. So it's really important to challenge these stigmas. And there are ways of overcoming it. We can overcome it by improving our knowledge and ensuring that our attitudes towards others are informed. We can ensure that we have confidence, that we're practicing in a trauma-informed and sensitive way. And also normalizing conversation about pre-pregnancy lifestyle and also respectfully exploring changes, if any, upon realizing pregnancy. And this may feel less judgmental than a formal undertaking of an alcohol history, for example. And then also thinking about co-creation of language with families with FASD to ensure that we have a respectful narrative established, and also that individuals have an ownership of the language used or shared. And the language we use can make a real difference. If you want some further information and access to FASD language guides, you can find them on the FAST website at the link there on the slide as well. So now just to spend a little bit of time thinking about some practical tips to thinking about how to understand and support FASD in the classroom. There's a lot more depth we could go into today, but I think actually we have the guides in the professional learning activity that you can explore in much more depth and get more from, but really just a taster today. But we've already mentioned how typically there are 10 functions of the brain which may potentially be affected by exposure to alcohol during pregnancy, as shown in this image on the screen. However, of course, bearing in mind that not every individual will experience challenges in these areas. And learners with FASD, the same as all learners, they have the potential to learn and experience success. School life can really present challenges for individuals with FASD and adaptations to the curriculum, and that means the totality of all experiences. And also thinking about the physical and the social environments should help learners to positively engage and successfully participate in all that the curriculum has to offer. So just thinking first of all, before moving on to think about ways to support, just things that you might notice with individuals who have FASD in your classrooms. So first you might notice executive functioning differences. So differences in brain development can cause challenges with executive functioning, meaning some children and young people may benefit from additional support with things like planning and organising themselves during work tasks or their belongings, their school bags or lockers or things like that. Also, hyperactivity and impulsivity are common features of FASD, and many individuals have a dual diagnosis of ADHD as well. So many individuals will find it difficult to make swift judgments when assessing risk, and they might often act before they think, such as touching something that's hot or lashing out, or they may take longer to learn from natural consequences in situations as well. In terms of sensory and motor, many individuals may be over or undersensitive to the sensory environment. You might notice similarities with autistic children that you're supporting when it comes to sensory differences and needs. So it might be things like strong smells or noise, for example, they might be particularly adverse to or sensitive of. A number of children and young people with FASD have a sensitive gag reflex as well. And also due to their sensory issues, they can be particularly sensitive to the texture and temperature of their food as well. And for some individuals with FASD, their mobility might be affected. So they might have low muscle tone, which can contribute to fatigue throughout the day that you might be noticing. Thinking about academic skills, so some of the challenges a learner might experience are things like problems with language, short-term memory can be an issue, difficulty grasping instructions, comprehension. Also, mixing reality and fiction can be a thing, which can cause difficulty with group social interactions, for example, and also difficulty with problem solving, planning, and difficulties with attention and hyperactivity, and also coordination as well. So there might be things that you notice in individuals you're working with. So as a result, a learner might experience challenges with reading and writing and things like mathematical concepts, particularly money and time. And also homework expectations might also present additional challenges, which we might need to think about a little bit more as well for individuals. And then living and social skills. So many children and young people with FASD will make great efforts to fit in and can be really skilled in taking the cues of others and following their peers, even if in fact they don't really understand what's happening. So it can be helpful just to be aware of that sometimes, that actually that ability to sort of follow and do might be masking that underlying difficulty around comprehension. It might be masking some feelings of confusion and overwhelm that the child might be experiencing. Also, many children and young people with FASD have been reported to appear to lack an internal body clock, finding it difficult to differentiate between night and day. So as a result, establishing and maintaining a healthy sleep routine can be really challenging for a lot of children that we work with, which can potentially impact on their energy levels throughout the school day as well. Thinking about cognition, some children and young people may struggle with abstract concepts. For example, they might find number work and maths relatively easy, but struggle with learning to tell the time or manage money. Also, skills in reading comprehension might not match their reading ability again. Also, many learners with FASD benefit from having instructions broken down and delivered one thing at a time. Processing too much information at once can be quite overwhelming and confusing as well. So thinking about how to break things down into chunks can be really helpful. Thinking about communication, delayed development in social skills is really common in FASD as well. So some children with FASD enjoy playing with children who are younger than them, as the games they play are often simpler and more straightforward. The challenges around communication might not always be obvious. And if you're not sure, it's always worth consulting a speech and language therapist for advice as well. And then also thinking about memory, difficulties with remembering's a feature common to individuals with FASD. Children and young people might show difficulty remembering how things happened or what sequence they happened in. And they might also have difficulty with working memory, dealing with more than one piece of information in their head at one time. Problem solving and maths can be a challenge in that situation as well. And I think part of the challenge of this too can be in social interactions as well. Sometimes children can be accused of lying or confabulation as well, which we need to be aware of too, in the back of our mind. But actually, what might be at the root of this are differences or difficulties around memory. And then lastly, another thing that you might notice that we'll share today is affect regulation. So thinking about emotions and feelings. So some individuals with FASD may struggle to tune into, to understand and manage their own emotions. They may respond unexpectedly in some situations and also benefit from co-regulation from supporting adults. So we need to be careful not to put the onus on the individual, but think about what supports we can put in place in this area. And understandably too, due to school-related challenges such as trying to sit still or coping with the sensory environment, learners can spend a lot of time feeling confused and overwhelmed, which can lead to anxiety and dysregulation. And parents and carers often report that their child can come home feeling tired, and often the dysregulation is more apparent at home as well. So it's really important to keep those relationships with parents so that we're aware that we might not be saying in the school setting what parents are saying at home, and that might not be a reflection on the parents or their ability to parent, but might be a sign that there is further need for support. So a very light touch as we begin to round off, but just thinking about how you can help in the classroom. There's a link there to a guide from the FASD team called What Educators Need to Know. A lot of the information from the presentation today comes from that guide, which is very comprehensive and was created by a mixed group of professionals. and it's really helpful. So I would recommend that you explore that. It's also explored within the professional learning activity as well. But just thinking about a number of simple approaches today that can be taken to support engagement and participation for learners with FASD in the classroom setting. So thinking about tuning into the child, looking for their individual strengths and building on them. Supporting with emotional regulation by adapting the physical and social environment to reduce the likelihood of dysregulation. And also trying to, as much as we can, take a positive approach and doing what we do as practitioners. It's why we do the job, but having that caring attitude and positive mindset can go a long way in providing support that's responsive to the individual's unique way of experiencing the world around them. Thinking about how any goals and approaches that we take are developmentally relevant as well, and really keeping in mind for FASD in particular that spiky profile, which can be masking underlying challenges. So it's important to ensure that anything we do supports and matches the child's stage of development rather than their chronological age. Thinking about structured routines and consistency, this could be helpful to so many of our learners. Things like visual timetables and sequencers and breaking down routines can really support with all sorts of activities. And making sure that all routines throughout the school day are clear and predictable can really help reduce anxiety and promote independence. So it's no different for children with FASD than so many other children that we're supporting as well. And thinking about how to set up a really calm environment. So calm, uncluttered, well-organised classrooms can really provide optimal conditions for learning and reduce sensory stimulation and also promote independence. And sometimes it's the really small, simple things that seem like our bread and butter that can make all the difference. But sometimes I think in a very busy environment, very dynamic, these simple things that can be the first things to go. And actually revisiting these can often be the first steps towards solutions to the bigger problems that we might be experiencing. Thinking about overlearning and repetition as well. Many children and young people with FASD can really benefit from that when it comes to either repetition of routines, but also opportunities for overlearning in class activities as well. And not just assuming if something's been covered once that it's been fully taken in, but really going back to these things as well. Movement breaks can be incredibly helpful as well for a lot of individuals with FASD. We've mentioned today the links that are often seen with ADHD as well. Children with FASD are often described as being constantly on the move, and many children really do find it hard sitting still for extended periods of time. So building in planned movement breaks throughout the day can really help making sure that they're structured in. And also things like an agreed fidget item can also really help with focus and concentration. And of course, these things need to be very carefully selected, but they can be helpful when you find the right one. And then also providing a safe space. We would recommend this for many children with neurodevelopmental differences. It can be really helpful that a learner knows that they've got a space that's for them, that they can retreat to when they're starting to feel heightened. There is guidance on the National Autism Implementation Team's website around how to set up a safe space, taking into account an individual learner's perspectives and preferences as well. So it's worth looking at that guide for guidance as well if you're interested. So just as we come towards the end of this presentation, I'm not going to show this to you just now. I know that not everybody on the call was able to experience the films today, so I don't want to put you through that again. But certainly in your own time, this is a really worthwhile 5-minute film to watch back in your own time. It's from the FASD Hub, and it covers key tips to support individuals with FASD, and it's a really nice, really helpful summary with the top tips. And then just stepping back and thinking more broadly, there are other sources of help which are really important when it comes to supporting any individual with additional support needs, not just those who have FASD. We can't emphasize strongly enough the importance of positive and effective partnerships with parents and carers. That collaboration is so important because we know that parents and carers know their child better than anybody, and they can provide insights into approaches for support that have worked well at home and which could be replicated in the learning environment. So that's your number one source of support if you're wondering about what steps to take. And also, don't be afraid to ask for help. Information and support is available. And we've directed your attention today to our colleagues who are extremely knowledgeable and experienced in relation to FASD. But also in your local areas, you'll have educational psychologists, allied health professionals, and other services who can offer information and guidance that's relevant to the individual. Collaboration across professionals can provide a really good opportunity to understand a child's presentation and their underlying needs from a variety of different perspectives. And of course, as you can see on the screen, just referring to our national practice model, Getting It Right for Every Child, which supports collaborative, joined up processes and practice as well when we're thinking about our multidisciplinary collaborative working and partnership with parents. So as we draw to a close, I'd just like to thank you for your time and interest today. We'd be really grateful if you could take some time to complete the evaluation on the screen, and we can put a link to that in the chat as well. It really helps us with planning future professional learning opportunities. We are going to stop the recording now and respond to any questions that have come up. My colleague Jen Shields from FASD and also Sam Nicholson from Education Scotland have been monitoring the chat, so some questions might have been answered, but you're welcome to switch on microphones and cameras if you'd like to ask anything, or pop those questions into the chat as well. And I'll just leave that link up for a little while longer, just in case you need a bit longer to access it.